Hi everybody! Since the past 1.5 years, we've been hearing the news about the government's plans to shut down Bsnl. And ever since we started following the news, we've always seen Bsnl as a loss-incurring company which incurred thousands of crores of losses every single year. In fact, in the past 10 years itself, Bsnl has incurred a combined loss of more than 80,000 crores. And considering the case of Air India and government bureaucracy in general, we by default assume that Bsnl is also one of those ill-run businesses that the government just cannot handle, isn't it? Well, guess what? In FY21, while the market went crazy to see that Reliance Jio generated a profit of 12,537 crores, very few of us know that there was a time when Bsnl generated a profit of 10,183 crores, and that too in a single year. And from 2001 to 2008, Bsnl had generated a cumulative profit of 46,668 crores, which was more than the next three telecom operators combined. And that too, in spite of all the subsidized schemes that it rolled out for rural areas and for farmers. And not just that, it once had a market share of 70% and literally acted as the backbone of the Indian telecommunication industry. So the question is, what exactly went wrong with Bsnl that it suddenly went from being a jewel of India to a sick company in less than a decade? Was it yet another government mishandling, or was it deliberately paralyzed by the private sector? And most importantly, as citizens of India, what are the lessons that we need to learn from the tragic downfall of Bsnl? This video is brought to you by Wint, but more on this at the end of the video. To understand the fall of Bsnl, we first have to understand why is it critical for a nation like India to mandatorily have government companies operating in certain sectors even though they incur heavy losses. Well, in this case, there are three important reasons that very few people understand. The first reason why a government company is essential is for accessibility. You see, if a company like Airtel wants to serve a particular region, then the most important factor it's going to consider is profits. So if there are only 100 farmers living in a particular village with only 10 of them who can afford to pay for Airtel, then for Airtel, setting up a tower, spending a ton of capital and human resource does not make any sense at all, because eventually it will incur losses. But if you look at it from the government standpoint, while for Airtel they are just customers, for the government of India they are citizens of the country who need to be taken care of, who need to be uplifted so that they can eventually go on to contribute to the economy of the country. Why? Because only when they have access to basic facilities like telephone, electricity and water can they actually become resourceful to the economy of India. In fact, many of you must have even heard about something called the Krishi SIM card that offers dirt cheap internet and calling to farmers. And this is also the reason why even today you will see that BSNL's network is available even in the remotest parts of our country, whereas your Idea, Jio and Airtel do not work in those regions, especially a region like Ladakh. And this brings me to the second reason, and that is regulation, which means tomorrow if Jio and Airtel join hands to become a duopoly, they might start increasing the price of their data. And now that internet has become super important to us, even if these companies double the charges of the internet, we will have to pay them anyways. But in this case, if a company like Bsnl exists, it will by default give out service at a nominal rate. That way, the people who cannot afford a Jio or Airtel will always have a company like Bsnl to fall back on. And lastly, in case of a natural calamity like that of Uttarakhand or even a wartime situation, again, while Airtel and Jio might not consider it their agenda to set up towers, Bsnl is obligated to set up their infrastructure at the earliest, because it is not a question of profits but a question of citizens' safety, and in case of a war scenario, it is a question about national security itself. Now, although this could be done with strict regulation on private players, it is always safer to have an in-house organization for these critical requirements. These are the reasons why, even if Bsnl bleeds hundreds of crores of losses, it is very important to keep the company alive. But in case of Bsnl, let alone losses, the company was a market leader with 10,000 crores in profits. And it was only after 2008 that Bsnl suddenly started incurring losses. So the question is, how? This is a story that dates back to early 2000s. During this time, landlines were the primary mode of communication. And during this time, Bsnl occupied nearly 70% of the market. And with evolving tech, Bsnl also started laying the foundations for 2G internet connections at the remotest corners of the country. Whereas other private players found it commercially unviable to do that during that time. And in spite of reaching the unviable locations, BSNL managed to earn such hefty profits that they posted profits of 5,976 crores, 10,183 crores and 8,939 crores during 2003, 4 and 5. Until this time, the company was operating almost like an autonomous body with very less scrutiny from the government committees. But this is when a news broke out about the Telecom Minister of India.
The Central Bureau of Investigation interrogated former Telecom Minister Dayanidhi Maran in the illegal telephone exchange case on Wednesday.
Dayanidhi Maran, who was the Indian Telecom Minister between 2004 and 2007, of using his influence and colluding with senior officials of the state-run Bsnl to draw 323 high-speed lines to his residence. Well, it is alleged that the exchange was set up to upload signals of channels of the Sun TV network, a multilingual television empire owned by Dayanidhi Maran.
Long story short, according to the CBI, Dayanidhi Maran used his official position and got private telephone exchanges installed at his residence. These 700 high-speed lines were used for business transactions of the Sun network, which was owned by his brother Dayanidhi Maran. This case was a very big deal, not because of the laws, but because fraud in ministry and government and keeping huge phone systems off record is also a national security risk. This was where the government started getting involved in BSNL's matters. And this is where a man named A. Raja took over the reins from Maran in 2007. During this time, BSNL was in discussion about rolling out something called the WiMAX technology. This was a telecommunication technology that was aimed at providing wireless data over long distances, basically wireless broadband. This would have helped BSNL roll out speedy internet connections all across the country. But guess what? This is where one of the biggest scams in Indian history came to light, which was the 2G scam.
3 days before Parliament resumes, the decade's biggest scam has triggered a political war.
Parliament set to resume in 3 days. The report is likely to trigger yet another political battle.
The JPC has put the blame squarely on then Telecom Minister A. Raja, claiming he misled the Prime Minister on procedures followed.
Now, when this happened, although it did not affect BSNL directly, it was very evident that a lot of frauds might be taking place within the company. So after 2007 onwards, the government started inquiring every small tender that BSNL rolled out. This is where the company started to slow down, starting from its tender system. Now, for those who don't know about the tender system, here's a very simple explanation to understand the same. The way the system works is that, let's say the government wants to build a bridge. So what will it do? It will roll out a tender inviting all the construction companies in the country by stating all the requirements of building that particular bridge. Then multiple companies will come together and they will start presenting their plans and cost of building the bridge. Then after these proposals are submitted, the government will check what is the background of the company, which one of these companies has actually completed similar projects in the past, what is the methodology of execution, and most importantly, what is the cost and time of execution of the project. And based on these parameters, the company is given the contract by the government to execute the project. In this case, instead of a bridge, it was about laying down the communication technology like WiMAX to enable wireless broadband all across the country. But this is where the setback started coming. After the Maran incident and the 2G scam, the government started digging for corrupt practices that could have happened in the tender system. And not so surprisingly, according to Economic Times, a string of shell companies and dubious companies were being shortlisted, and at the same time, several reputed companies with proven track record of offering WiMAX services were disqualified in the first round itself. These companies included Soma Networks and Cisco-backed Telecom and even Unwire India. And the moment these type of news started coming out, CBI got into the case. And soon enough, according to some employees, BSNL was not allowed to procure equipments and materials, and orders were delayed and cancelled, and the entire company started to slow down. According to Economic Times, during this 3-year period, that is between 2007 to 2010, while Indian telecom industry was growing at the fastest pace in history, while every other private player was aggressively scaling up their infrastructure and were pouring in crores of rupees into upgradation, BSNL was not able to place any significant orders for equipments. So practically, with each passing day, BSNL was losing its market share to private sectors. And while the company was at the brink of sinking into losses, in 2008-9 somehow a new ray of hope came up. In 2008-9, a project worth $10 billion was taken up by BSNL to lay down 93 million GSM lines all across the country. And this could have enabled BSNL to provide top-grade voice and data facilities all across the country. And had this project gone through, it seemed like BSNL would have been the undisputed king of telecom in India. And this project at that time was the world's largest telecom contract. But guess what? In 2010, the Central Vigilance Commission started suspecting irregularities and again went dig deeper. They pointed out that the disqualification of important vendors like Nokia Siemens, ZTE and Alcatel had left only two players in the bid, which were Ericsson and Huawei. And since they were the only contenders left, Bsnl could not get the best price as there was no competition for the contract at all. And because of this irregularity, again, the entire $10 billion tender was cancelled and Bsnl was asked to start all over again. And while Bsnl was still cluelessly trying to issue tenders, they had run out of mobile network capacity in most regions of the country. And during the exact same time, Airtel, Vodafone, Idea and other players started to roll out 3G services and eventually started eating into BSNL's market share. As a result, during this time from 2007 to 2010, the profits of the company started sliding from 3,009 crores in 2007 to a loss of 1,822 crores in 2010. And guess what? Due to this stalling, according to the employees of BSNL that we spoke to, from 2006 to 2012, during the most important growth period of Indian telecom, BSNL made very few to none significant purchases into development of its infrastructure. This was the first and perhaps the most important reason for BSNL's downfall, which was power-hungry, greedy ministers who wanted to fill their pockets at the cost of a national asset. And here's where things started getting worse. As the mobile revolution picked up, BSNL's most important source of revenue, that is landline phones, started to go obsolete. The number of landline phone users had dropped from 24 million in 2016 to just 19 million in July 2020. And here's where the second blow came up, when Jio Wave emerged in 2016.
The world is at the beginning of a digital revolution. So ladies and gentlemen, today I have great pleasure in announcing a revolutionary concept for the Indian market. All voice calls for Jio customers will be absolutely free.
Reliance Jio has become the largest telecom operator in India, adding 5.6 million mobile subscribers in November.
Now, while most people think free data and calling was the sole reason for Jio's growth, very few people understand that it was actually a massive advantage that 4G as a technology gave to Jio, both in terms of cost and service. The question is how? Now let's take an oversimplified case to understand how 4G is different from 2G or 3G. If Yash and I are talking to each other in the early 2000s, the process would look something like this. When I press the call button on my phone, a digital signal is sent from the antenna on my mobile phone to the nearest cell tower. From there, the signal is transmitted to a switching center. Now my switching center contacts other centers in the complex network to identify the center closest to Yash. And once Yash's switching center is identified and notified, it sends a signal to the cell tower that is nearest to Yash, which then transmits it to his phone and his phone starts ringing. And when answered, the connection is established through a complex underground network. This path is called circuit and this process is called circuit switching. Now for data, the case was a little different. Here, a different communication method called packet switching was used. In this method, if you're sending an email, your entire email is broken down into multiple packets, wherein each packet could be containing a single word or sometimes even a single letter. But with this data, the address of the receiver is also mentioned. Then, once the email is grouped in packets, these packets are routed through a huge network, wherein each packet might take a different route and sometimes they might even go all across the world. So by breaking the communication information down to small packets, it allows the same path to be shared among multiple users in the network. Now in case of both 2G and 3G, both voice network and data network had to be maintained separately. But this is where Jio came up with a revolution. And the advantage that Jio had over any other telecom player was that it was a purely 4G network. So while others had to run one network each for voice and data, Jio had to maintain only one network for data because even their calls were routed through the data network. This paradigm shift in approach lowered the cost of equipment by a very large extent. As a result, it lowered the operating cost for the 4G network. And in comparison to Jio, our poor BSNL did not even get the approval for 4G and was using decade-old and energy inefficient equipments and occupied a large real estate footprint. This drastically shot up their cost while Jio was using the same margin of cash to acquire millions of customers with each passing year. And finally, it was only in 2019 that BSNL got the spectrum allocated. And now they are moving to 4G and BSNL is yet to start with 4G rollout in 2022. And lastly, because of the cash crunch, human resource management of BSNL started to shake. Now people, this is also very detailed, but then if I get into the details of it, it will result in information overload. So I'm going to attach the sources of this matter in the description so that you can read that completely by yourself. So this is how a golden goose of the Indian economy was paralyzed to go from 10,183 crores in annual profits to a loss of 15,499 crores in 2019-20. And this brings me to the most important part of the episode, and that are the things that you need to learn and read about so that you understand the functioning of government companies and you understand what the government is doing with your tax money. Before we move on, I want to thank our partners Wint Wealth for supporting our content. Wint Wealth is a platform by which you can invest in NBFCs with very strong backers and earn 9 to 11% returns. Now, most of you might be investing into the stock market as a long-term investor. But if you're someone who wants to make steady returns for a short-term goal, that's where Wint assets can come in very handy for you. The investment process into Wint Wealth is super simple. As you can see, the asset page has detailed information about the asset. On the right hand side, you can see a table by which you can determine how many units of the bond you want to buy. And then the payment process is also super easy. You can pay via UPI, net banking, or even use the Wint Wealth fund itself. And that's it, you are done. By investing into Wint Wealth, you can earn returns that are higher than FDs and at the same time, not as volatile as stocks. And before you invest into any of the Wint Wealth assets, read through the asset details very carefully and understand the risk before putting your money in. Wint Wealth is backed by Zerodha's Rainmatter, Kunal Shah, and many more reputed investors. And for full disclosure, even thinkschool is an investor in Wint Wealth. So if this sounds useful to you, check out Wint Wealth from the special link in the description. Moving on, the first thing you need to understand is that while businesses function to profit from the customers, government companies function for national duty and economic upliftment of its citizens. So don't ever blindly compare them with government companies and say that government companies suck, because that's what I did in the beginning because of my ignorance. Number 2, talk to ex or current BSNL employees and they will tell you that this entire video barely scratches the surface and there are hundreds of other non-documented reasons by which BSNL was paralyzed calculatively, and you must do that for all government companies because it will give you a deeper understanding of the functioning of these companies. And lastly, I am attaching a ton of study materials in the description, so please go through them. Because of constraint of time and information overload, like I said, I have tried to cover the most important points, but if you want to have a look at the bigger picture, I would highly recommend you to go through those sources and drop a comment about what you think about BSNL and other government companies that are handled or mishandled by the existing or the previous government. That's all from my side for today, guys. If you learned something valuable, please make sure to hit the like button in order to make YouTube Baba happy. And for more such insightful business and political case studies, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.